This is the Foundation for Defence of Democracy's Janatan Sayeh. Jonathan, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have your company. What do we know about the Ayatollah's son? Presumably he hates Donald Trump as much as his father, and probably quite angry about the fact that Donald Trump assassinated his father, his mother, and some more of the family. Could this new fella be a problem too?
You are absolutely correct in pointing out the legacy of his father. He is the embodiment of every malign activity that his father was pursuing. But in addition to that, he's a great example of all the awful features of this Islamist regime. In addition to being a theocrat, he has great ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a designated terror group by the United States that has been leading this war effort against Israel and Washington. So because of that, because of those great ties to the military apparatus, there is a clear sign from the regime in Tehran that taking out one leader does not change the behavior of the Islamic Republic, which would further legitimize any form of regime change ambitions led by the coalition. Of course, we know the momentum on the ground is greatly anti-Islamist. Iranians have been thriving for a secular form of democracy, have been looking at the West. So it's very interesting for us to, again, remind ourselves that no matter what policy we pursue against the United States, whether it's appeasement, war, or maximum pressure, we cannot get behavior change from religious zealots that are led by the Shia theocracy in Tehran.
Now, Jonathan, this succession has been pretty predictable. In fact, Donald Trump said as much as a week ago that this would be unacceptable to him. We want someone that will bring harmony and peace to Iran. And Jonathan, a great many of the oppressed people in Iran feel the same too. Surely it can't be allowed to happen that the Ayatollah's son is just granted the succession to the throne. I mean, what was the point of the war if they just replaced one bad Islamist with another?
I could not agree with you more. I do think there is a mindset in Washington of trying to implement a Venezuela model in the Iranian context, trying to use somehow other officials within the system to avoid an absolute systemic change of the ruling entity. That's not going to be applicable to the case of Iran. Let's even say Washington sent the most positive signal to regime officials. They're not going to be receptive. There is no entity, despite the name being hardliner versus quote-unquote reformist. In policy, there has been no difference. You might have an Ayatollah that might wear like a white turban instead of a black turban. Ultimately, we are pursuing really, we're looking at the same regime. So the idea of somehow replacing one with a quote-unquote pragmatic one, I think the word pragmatic Ayatollah in itself is an oxymoron. I yet to really meet one. Once you bring in the role of Islamism into any foreign policy decision, you cannot expect any rational behavior coming from them. And that's what we've seen so far. So to really stop the war effort at this point, simply just to replace one religious fanatic with another one is not going to serve America's interest, and is definitely going to demoralize masses and millions of Iranians that saw this campaign as a liberation, and they were receptive to the strikes taking out their oppressors.
Okay, Jonathan, that brings us on to what happens next. The huge question, if Ayatollah Senior has been assassinated, presumably Ayatollah Junior could face the same grim fate. But what happens next? I mean, there hasn't been an uprising from the Iranian population yet. Presumably they need to be heavily armed, heavily assisted, and perhaps even assisted from outside foreign armies. Is that what needs to happen next?
It certainly does, and you're explaining the next chapter of the war. Once the regime's capabilities are effectively decimated and their ballistic missiles are depleted, which we're headed that way, we would have to enter the next chapter, the next phase, that would be about leveraging the momentum on the ground against the Islamic Republic. You're also right to point out that we have not seen any active protests in the last week or two, and that is because the president and the opposition leader, Crown Prince Pahlavi, have told and instructed Iranians not to rise up. So this is a calculated measure. We want to ensure that we minimize civilian casualties. So I think everyone's on standby, ensuring that once effectively the retaliatory measures from the regime have been targeted, then we would move on to chapter 2, which would be how we can move assets on the ground. I think you're right to assume that there's definitely been some involvement trying to aid this protest movement. Again, we'd be talking about masses coming out. We saw millions of Iranians come out in January when there were calls for protest. We have every reason to believe the numbers are going to be be higher this time. So once you really have the wave of uprising with a weakened regime, that's going to look more promising, of course. And again, we cannot really undersell the role of the opposition led by the Crown Prince that has a great network inside, has been in touch with folks, and Iranians have been receptive to his leadership.
Okay, Janatan Sayeh, superb commentary, excellent guest. Please come back on the show again. That's the research analyst at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, Janatan Sayeh. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now,